Okay, so this is the finale of a wonderful week. Again, I want to thank each of you for being here. You are the reason that this conference works. You're the reason that we're able to have any success whatsoever with what we do in planning and coordinating and putting on this conference. Without you being here and your participation and your feedback, we're going nowhere. So we thank you very much, and we encourage you to continue to provide feedback, because our goal is to continue to make this conference better and better each and every year so that we can serve you. That is the vision and mission of the Grass-Fed Exchange. We are an educational organization, and our goal is to provide you with the very best lineup of speakers and farm tours that we possibly can each and every year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this up with just a quick little story. I'm not going to keep you here long because I know we're all tired and we need to get home. So I'm going to give you a quick little story that's going to sort of encapsulate what we can do, okay? Now, if you envision this, westward expansion across the Great Plains of the United States by the European settlers started when? It started in earnest after the end of the Civil War, right? And that's when the government opened up all the rights to homesteading and so forth. And so we started this mass migration westward. One of the reasons we did that was because in the preceding couple of hundred or so years, we had basically farmed out all of our soils east of the Mississippi, okay, with a heck of a lot of monoculture crops. And so everybody was excited about being able to move westward to find new promised lands. And so they started that migration across the Great Plains, and they discovered an incredibly vibrant array of complex and diverse life. And when they put the plow to it, those first few years, they didn't require any fertilizer. There wasn't any to be had anyway. They didn't require lime. They didn't require pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and all of the other things that we think are synonymous with agriculture today. But yet, after just a few years of putting the plow to the soil, in the span of only 50 to 60 years, what did we do to the Great Plains? We created the Great American Dust Bowl. Okay? So in 50 to 60 years, we went from an incredibly vibrant ecosystem, highly fertile, highly productive, and had been that way for thousands of years, to the Dust Bowl. So it doesn't take long, folks, to create a desert out of something that was a paradise. And it's our fault. We did it. Not nature, not global warming, not any of the other things that we want to blame things on. We did it. But I'm going to give you some good news to end the conference with. We can actually reverse that process. And we have found that we can reverse it much more rapidly than we ever thought. Now, to start though, we entered a new year, and my wife always asks me about setting some kind of resolution each year, and I always resist that because I don't want to break it. But anyway, she said, well, you need to eat a little healthier, have a healthier lifestyle. And I was like, well, I already eat grass-fed beef, we grow on gardens and pastured poultry and all that. What do you want me to do? And she said, well, why don't you try an all-vegan, gluten-free, non-GMO, low-fat, soybean-free, antibiotic-free, organic, low-carb meal? And this is what I ended up with. Okay, so let me tell you one way that we can reverse what we have created on the land, and that is through what we call adaptive grazing. Ray talked about adaptive grazing this morning. So we call it adaptive multi-paddock or adaptive high stock density grazing. An absolutely amazing tool if used properly. And the key word is adaptive, okay? If we take anything and try to turn it into a rigid system, then we have, at that very moment, made a key mistake that we will pay for not only years, but for decades to come, okay? So it's all about adaptivity. It's all about being highly observant and being able to understand each and every day what is occurring in nature and being able to adjust accordingly. So a few years ago, I had an opportunity with the partner that I run cattle with to be able to start out brand new on a farm. Now, I've been consulting for many years, and so we've been doing this across North America for a long time. But in most instances, you know, I never had a chance to really start out to where we could record every bit of data that I thought we needed from day one. I finally had that opportunity. So in the fall of 2010, this farm was purchased in northeast Mississippi. That's what it looked like on the day of purchase, okay? Absolutely terrible. But now keep in mind, in Mississippi, at this point in time, there had been more than 150 years of continuous farming, okay, of these soils. So they were very much farmed out, and for a lot of that time span, you know, what do we grow in Mississippi? Cotton, okay? And Ray, what happens when you grow cotton? Cotton, cotton, year in and year out. It's not very pretty, is it? So here was our starting point. Again, remember, now we had a new toy to play with, all right? So we could collect data from day one, and here's what it looked like. So you saw the picture, but here's what's underneath that picture. Okay, soil organic matter ranged from 1.3 to 1.6% across that farm, and it's right at 1,000 acres, okay? Water infiltration rates were less than a ½ inch an hour. That means, folks, as you saw on the rainfall simulator up here this morning, that whenever we got a rainfall, Doug, it looked like the first panel, okay? It all ran off and it was muddy. Plant bricks. How many people know what bricks is? Okay, good. Plant bricks was averaging only about 2%. That's not enough to put hardly any gain or performance on cattle whatsoever without heavy supplementation. And we had NRCS and Mississippi State University Extension personnel come in and count major forage species, or what they consider forage, and there were only 3 to 4 that existed across that landscape at that time. And the stocking rate, it was taking about 6 acres per animal unit, and in Mississippi that's terrible, okay? It's not very good at all, and you're not going to be able to make land pay like that. So what did we do? The first winter, remember, it was purchased in the fall, so there was nothing there to eat. So the first winter, we did bale grazing, just to start getting organic matter on the ground and stimulating something. Okay, and then the first grazing season, we implemented high stock density, short duration grazing, followed by long rest periods. And we also incorporated strategic use of microbial stimulation using quorum sensing. This was the first spring, okay? Now, the set of cows that was dropped in here are the same set of cows that exist on that land today, okay? So we haven't destocked, we haven't removed anybody. As a matter of fact, over the intervening years since 2010, we have just continued to add cattle. So these cows were not used to eating what they were eating here in these pictures, all right? They had never been trained to eat that. They were used to much better pastures. And by the way, they were pregnant and due to calve that spring. Now, what do you see here in the picture? What are they eating? Do you see any what we would term as forages? Very little, okay? Rather, you see fields full of weeds, including ironweed and ragweed and pigweed and sumac and on, you name it. Folks, in Mississippi, we can grow every kind of weed known to man, and we have invented some, okay? That's just the way it is. Our environment is very conducive for weed and brush growth. And so again, we incorporated high stock density grazing and started moving them across the landscape. And you can see my grandsons in the Ranger there. They love to help me with doing this. And this is what these paddocks would look like when they would come out. So by creating a competitive environment among the cattle and changing their grazing behavior, then they became highly competitive, and they learned to eat weeds very, very quickly if they wanted to survive. And you can see these are stalks and stems of ironweed and ragweed, and they would strip all the leaves off. And I had a lot of neighbors that were telling us that we were going to starve these cattle to death. And what were we going to do, especially since they were calving and were going to be nursing, lactating. And for those of y'all that know Dr. Gordon Hazard, even Dr. Hazard made that statement to me at that point in time, okay? But this is what they were eating. And what we found is during that time period, that first summer, even though they were calving and lactating, they were actually gaining weight, gaining body condition. And so we measured, we did plant tissue analysis and also did a lot of bricks measurement. And what we found was that these weeds were loaded with bricks. They were highly nutritious. Why? Because they were much more deeply rooted than the monocultures that had been grown there before. Okay, so the monocultures had mined out that top strata of soil of the minerals, of the nutrients, but yet there was still a rich store up underneath that the roots of the monocultures had not been able to reach and tap into. So the weeds filled the void when the monoculture crops disappeared, and they were reaching down deep into the soil to pull up the mineral stores that still existed there. This was year 2, okay? So what do you notice different here? Okay, still some weeds, right? But a lot more forages coming in, okay, coming into play. Now, there was no mechanical intervention, there was no chemical intervention, and there was no planting of any forages. So everything that you see coming up here was generated from the latent seed bank due to the stimulation of using adaptive grazing at high stock density. This was year 3 and year 4. So you can see that again, using very low inputs and using the livestock as our primary tool, we were able to consistently, each successive year, generate new and better and much more highly productive growth. So at the end of that period, here's where we ended up. Soil organic matters went from 1.3 and 1.6 to averaging between 5.2 and 5.6%. The forage species, again, we used NRCS personnel and extension personnel from Mississippi State to help with monitoring. Forage species increased from 3 to 4 to 43. including a lot of natives. Things like big blue stem and Indian grass and Illinois bundleflower and all of this other good stuff started showing up. More importantly, plant bricks increased from an average of 2% to 15% to 22%. That, in and of itself, significantly increases animal performance. And here's the beauty about that, is not only does the individual animal performance increase because of the higher bricks, but they also have to take fewer total bites of dry matter to achieve the same nutrient density and satiation, okay? Water infiltration rates went from less than a ½ inch an hour to 10+ inches an hour. So now we were keeping the vast majority of our rainfall rather than it running off. And stocking rate went from taking 6 acres per cow-calf unit to 1.5 acres per cow-calf unit on a year-round basis. And on top of that, we saw significant increases in earthworms, soil-level insects, pollinators, wildlife, you name it. All of it just exploded as a result of improving the soil and improving plant diversity and complexity. So, Ray's talked about this, Fred has talked a lot about this, and Fred, I really appreciate your research and your work because it is absolutely true, and what we have found is that diversity and complexity is the key to animal performance, animal health, and everything else comes along with it. The pollinators, the insects, the predators, all the other wildlife species, water quality, you name it, it all comes in the same package. And here's why it's important, folks. If we have diversity and complexity above the ground versus a monoculture, then we also have diversity and complexity below the ground. And why is that important? Because where do our soil microbes live and function? Well, they live and function in the root zone, where the roots grow. Where roots don't grow, microbes don't either, okay? Or at least not in any high degree. So here's our desired mix. Here's what we manage for now. In every pasture, rather than monocultures, we want a mix of grasses, legumes, and forbs. Now to get that, that means we can't spray, right? There's a lot of other things we can't do that we consider to be typical management. So this is what I want pastures to look like, all right? In every pasture, I want to be able to see multiple grasses, multiple legumes, and multiple forbs. This is what is going to create a thriving environment, and this is what is going to create not only those primary nutrient compounds that Fred was talking about, but those critical secondary nutrient compounds that he was talking about, and allow those animals to be able to have the selectivity that they need to self-medicate and to perform. Another thing that we did was we decided that we were going to keep the cattle out of our ponds and lakes. We ring them all with polywire. We built these ramps down into each one so that they could have access. We laid down geotextile fabric, rocked over that so that we have a hard ramp so they can go down the ramps and drink, but they can never actually get into the ponds to silt them in. And we also ran lines out the levees so that we can gravity flow to troughs and significantly increase our water sources so that we can better rotate through all of those pastures. We stockpile both warm and cool seasons, perennials, and we graze both the warm season stockpiles and the cool season stockpiles during the winter months. And this was last January, moving cows to fresh stockpile on those pastures, and that was warm season perennial stockpile. This is the fencing rig I use, very simple. I just double-decked a Polaris Ranger. It allows us to be able to do everything very efficiently, very cost-effectively. This is the only piece of equipment I want to crank on a daily basis, okay? I don't want to crank a tractor, a truck, anything else. This is it. This is all I want to crank on a daily basis. I want to show you one more farm real quick, just because of the progress that this guy was able to make in a single year. This is a client of mine located in upstate South Carolina by the name of Don Jackson. And after a single year of adaptive grazing, he did a presentation last December at the National Grazing Lands Conference in Texas entitled Soil Destroyer to Soil Builder. These were his initial pasture conditions. He grew up on this farm, has been here his whole life, he's in his 60s, and he says, this is what it's always looked like, okay? And so they always had continuous grazing. They always fed a lot of hay in the winter and a lot of years. If they had dry summers, they would start feeding hay as early as August or September, okay? So this is what the pasture conditions look like. You can see oxidized manure patties, you know, basically grubbed down to the ground, creating a great environment for all kinds of weeds to come up. But after a single season of adaptive grazing, we didn't destock anything, okay? All we did was switch to adaptive grazing, single strand polywire, tread-in post, and that was it. And this is the result. And he told me that after more than 50 years of living on that farm, in this one single year of adaptive grazing, he's never seen this much grass in his entire life. And now he's getting ready to add cattle. This is one of the tools that we like to use to help track with our clients, so forth. You know, Pasture Map folks have been here, but it's a fantastic tool. I really appreciate somebody coming up with a tool that is simple and easy to use like that. And I'm going to end on this. Does grazing strategy and methodology matter? I'm going to show you some data and you decide. Okay, so what we did in the fall of 2014, we sampled 3 neighboring farms in Mississippi where I live. We used the farm that I just showed you, okay? So we've been doing adaptive grazing for just 5 years. Again, keep that in mind, just 5 years, okay? We sampled another farm that had been doing slow rotation, rotating the cattle every 2 to 3 weeks or so for about 50 plus years. And then another neighboring farm that for the past 30 years or so had been employing just continuous grazing. In other words, the cattle could roam wherever they wanted to at all times and be highly selective in their grazing. So all the farms had very similar soil type, were located in the same area. So we dug soil pits 3 feet deep at random locations and collected soil samples every 6 inches and measured a lot of different variables for each of those samples. We also noted root growth and structure and so forth. And here's what we found. If we look at total soil carbon in every 6-inch strata, starting in the top 6 inches, that's the horizon number 1, down to the bottom 6 inches or down to 3 feet, that's horizon 6, okay? In just 5 years of adaptive grazing, compared to 50 or more years of a slow rotation and 30 plus years of continuous grazing, look at what happened, okay? More total soil carbon, not just in the first 6 inches or 12 inches, but all the way down to 3 feet. So that means we weren't just socking it in just a little bit, Ray, okay? We were putting it in deep. But look at the other 2, okay? After much, much longer periods of grazing. Soil organic matter, same deal. And then finally, our ability to sequester carbon. Okay, if you look across in terms of carbon in kilograms per square meter, carbon in tons per acre, and so forth, again, significantly higher where we used the adaptive grazing. So does it matter? Yes, it matters quite a bit. Folks, we took decades to destroy our soils. We can rebuild them much more rapidly than we ever thought. That's what we need to be about the business of doing. And if we do that, we will have profound impacts for the good, as Ray said this morning, not just on a local basis, but on a global basis. And I want to end with this. You know, for most of you from the South, you understand this phrase. But in the South, we have a phrase that we can say that allows us to say anything we want to about somebody, and it's okay. And that phrase is, bless their hearts, okay? You know, for instance, you know, we can say, you know, Josephine, that baby of hers is just the ugliest thing I've ever seen. Bless its heart, you know. So the reason I'm saying that, though, is this. You know, over the past year, I've been trying to follow, you know, the presidential debates and so forth, and listening to all the candidates from both sides. And today, the only thing I can come up with is bless their hearts. So thank y'all very much. We appreciate you being here.